One of the most common questions on the internet around worm farming is to do with pest management. But if we set up our worm farms properly in the start and don't overfeed our worm farms, there is less chance of pests happening. Now, I'm not saying that they won't happen, but you will get milder amounts of them and less possible outbreaks. Now, nearly most all pests aren't really a problem at all unless you start getting things like fruit fly and maggots. And look, even the odd cockroach isn't really an issue. But what's happening is if you're getting these things in there, you're feeding your farm incorrectly. So what we need to do when pests appear is cut back on the food that we have in the worm farm and possibly start feeding them a bit of carbon. Like what I like to do, I have the newspaper and a bit of cardboard in and that's getting wet and rotten down. And if I see a few pests come down, I stop feeding. They go in, they start eating the bedding, they start eating the newspaper, the bits of cardboard. And as the pests leave because the food's not there and there's no food source for them, the worms are fine and they just start slowly feeding again. And you'll find that everything falls back into place. Now, another thing about pests is if your farm becomes too acidic, so slightly sour. And what happens is this is generally from overfeeding as well. So you'll get a bit of a smelly or start getting a bit funky, the food in there. It's starting to go off, which means that the worms haven't had time to consume it all. So there was too much food in there. Or they're avoiding that food source and heading to another favourite food source. And this is quite a common thing. So you need to keep an eye on what you're feeding them, how you're feeding them, and how long you're feeding them for. Some ways to get around the acidity, so the sourness of the worm farm, is to get a pH buffer. So this could be anything from oyster shells, it can be egg shells. I like to use dolomite. Now, this is a good tip for you guys. The dolomite that you buy, so the worm farm conditioning powder that you buy in a long tube at the shops, I'm not going to say any brands or anything like that because there's so many different types of them, is basically dolomite. And you can buy this much cheaper from different hardwares and nurseries and things like that. And you just sprinkle on a bit of that every time you give them food, or once or twice a week. Just a light application, not too much. This helps their gizzard as well, so they can actually process the food, and will keep the pH at a nice level. Now you don't have to worry about going and checking pHs and all that type of stuff. You'll see if there's too much food in there, it's starting to go sour and rotten, or if it starts to get a bit smelly and things aren't working properly, or lots of pests are coming in. Now with ants, it basically means ants and cockroaches and things like that. It basically means that your worm farm's too dry, and there could be dry patches throughout the bedding. So you need to give it a really good soaking, leave the tap open, grab all that nutrient, use it on your garden, and do it a few times over and over again until you feel that the worm farm's nice and moist. And then the ants and the cockroaches and things like that, they'll pretty much leave. Now flies, obviously you need to, fruit, you need to bury it down under the bedding as much as you can, so the fruit fly can't get to it. Any types of dairies and meats, you're going to get flies come in for maggots and stuff like that. So it's all about, really, pest management is all about the feeding and how you're feeding them, how often, what you're feeding them, and when you're feeding them. And if you get that right, just keep an eye on it, feed them less, and then bring it up slowly as the population increases, you'll be fine, and you won't really have to worry about pests very often. If you see small outbreaks of tiny little white bugs and things like that, don't worry so much. I get them in my worm farms, and then generally they're just a part of the decomposition and will help you produce a better compost inside your worm farm. Alright, so I'll see you at the next video. I hope you're enjoying the course so far. Lots more videos to come over time as I keep coming up with these ideas to keep educating you guys. And thank you everyone that's been coming in and doing this course. I really do appreciate each and every one of you. Remember, feel free to contact me in the coaching area because I'm there for you to help you every step of the way.